Troy Franklin is the most overrated Dynasty rookie receiver right now. We will explain why in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can read her at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. And Kate, I'm fired up for today's show because we are discussing Troy Franklin, wide receiver from Oregon. One of the more interesting receivers in this class, who a lot of people really like in dynasty leagues, and I can't quite figure out why. What did you see when you put on the tape?
Troy Franklin is a very interesting prospect, a third-year player coming out of Oregon, played with Oregon quarterback Bo Nix, and had a total breakout season in 2023. 81 receptions, almost 1,400 receiving yards, 14 touchdowns, posted a career high 17.1 yards per reception. He's a tall dude, like it comes in, just under 6'2". But Marcus, he's pretty lanky. He's a lanky boy.
He could use a cheeseburger or something.
Yeah, he could use a massive cheeseburger. 176 pounds, 5th percentile for wide receivers. And when you compare that with the fact that he is at the 61st percentile for height for wide receivers, you see that there's a little bit of a disconnect there. He's got relatively small hands, explosive athlete, which I think you would probably expect for a guy of a lower weight, but like an interesting prospect because he was productive, ranked 6th in terms of deep catches, 10th in terms of deep yards. A lot of explosive playmaking ability, but not a ton of play strength there. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure how he's going to translate to the NFL. He's got a very limited route tree coming out of Oregon. Didn't see a lot. I think he's a pretty purposeful route runner. I think that's probably the best way that you could describe Troy Franklin, but he doesn't have a ton of experience with different route types. So while he executed the routes that he was asked to, I think pretty well, he still wasn't asked to do a ton and didn't have that diversity in his route tree that you saw from like Aroma Dunze.
Yeah, to me, he is a vertical receiver at the next level who is an ancillary piece on your offense. He's not a focal point. But let's go through his strengths and weaknesses because I don't want to crush the kid before we give him some of his flowers because he is a good prospect. Okay, he is somebody that I think is going to be a top 50 receiver. You're talking about somebody who is 6'3", over 180 pounds, did in the run a 4.41, which is very good. We just don't see that many receivers over 6'2" that run that fast. I actually think he has pretty natural hands. Like he's not fighting the football the way that some of the other speed receivers tend to do. I think Tyquan Thornton, who we're going to talk about in comps later, is somebody who really struggled to find the football. DJ Chark, same way. I think he does a really good job of tracking the football and catching it. And there's not a lot of wasted movements in his game. Like he is from the snap of the ball, he's flying down the field. And there's a lot of value in that type of player. We constantly see NFL teams chasing speed. And that's why somebody like Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who has been a pretty unreliable player in the NFL, continues to get big deals because we just don't see guys that are this big and this fast very often. Now, the knock on Franklin is, and you mentioned, it's a limited route tree. Like he's basically running go routes and routes off of go routes, like deep posts and deep, deep over routes. Now, a lot of that is because of the Oregon system. So I'm not going to crush him for that.
But it's something that he's going to have to figure out at the next level.
Yeah. Here's my biggest concern, Kate. There is no experience against press coverage, really. And this is one of the knocks that I had on Jalen Hyatt last year when Jalen Hyatt was playing in the slot in Tennessee's offense. you have basically the first 15 yards just to get up to speed and run as fast as you can to make a route. That's not what it's going to be in the NFL. He's going to be an outside receiver facing press coverage on almost every single snap. It's a concern, and he doesn't play very strong. You can see on tape, like the few times that he does play a good cornerback or a physical cornerback, he just has no idea how to handle it. So I'm really concerned about how he translates in the NFL, because I've seen several of these type of receivers before come from wide open offenses and not be able to figure out how to run in an NFL offense.
Yeah, he's just going to be asked to do a lot more at the NFL level. He's going to be asked to do more than run as quickly as he can in a straight line. I really like the strengths that you highlighted, though. I want to go back to that. Not a lot of wasted movements in terms of his play strengths. Like, I think that really shows up in his footwork, especially like for a guy that, again, not a lot of nuance in terms of the diversity of his route tree, but for a big guy, I love the way that he moves his feet. I love his get off. I think there's a lot to like there. So maybe we do see some of that development at the next level. But I think that dynasty managers, fantasy football managers need to have some expectations for Franklin that the project coming out doesn't translate to an alpha wide receiver one that is ready to take on a immediate role as the focal point of an offense. Like I think the biggest concern there is that, at least to start in his career, probably going to be bigger one trick pony than you would really like to see for an immediate contributor within an offense and to your dynasty rosters.
I want to go back to his athleticism really quickly, because this is something that I've been struggling with a while. Is if you're going to be a deep threat receiver, I want you to be incredibly fast. And he is, like, right. He's fast. He's 4.41, but it's not like blazing. It's not Xavier Worthy running a 4.2. It's not Jalen Waddle, who is projected to run in the low 4.3s. 4.41 is a good time. It's not a great time. The biggest concern for me, Kate, is the 10-yard split, which was 1.61. That's ranks in the 19th percentile. That was actually the slowest of any wide receiver at the NFL Combine this year. If you're a speed receiver who doesn't have a quick get off, I just have concerns about how effective you're going to be in the NFL. We really haven't seen a lot of players have success with that slow of a 10-yard split, unless you are like a slot only type of receiver. And even then, it's pretty rare. That is a very, very concerning time for me.
Well, and it doesn't really translate either. Like, if you're going to beat, press coverage, you want to have play strength, you want to have a lot of burst immediately off the line. And that's probably where those concerns lie. But when Troy Franklin gets down the field, I think he offers, something that a lot of offenses need. He offers a lot of straight line speed. I think he is a vertical threat that a lot of offenses are missing. It's just a matter of like it not necessarily being a trait that you can work in as the focal point of the offense unless he develops a good deal here at the next level.
Yeah, and if you go to Mock Draftable, which if you're watching with us on YouTube right now, you actually see one of the Mock Draftable charts. There's only been a handful of receivers at the NFL Combine who have run a 1.61 10-yard split or worse, and then had a 1,000-yard season in the NFL. And those guys are like Jarvis Landry, Alshon Jeffrey, Kelvin Benjamin. You're talking about like big receivers that are using their bodies to like box out guys, not speed receivers. The speed receivers are running typically like the 1.50 10-yard split. So something about that just doesn't make me feel great. Like, if you're going to be a speed receiver, be incredibly quick. That's just not Troy Franklin, at least testing wise. So I'm concerned, but I want to dive into the advanced stats here, because I mean, as you would expect, some of the numbers are ridiculous. That the average depth per target is very, very good, but there are other numbers that leave a lot to be desired. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. passion, drive, and patience. That's what's the formula for winning championship is. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you the can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Kate, let's dive into the advanced numbers for Troy Franklin. What do we got?
We've got a little bit of a hodgepodge here. Now, from an analytics standpoint, 88th percentile in receiving grade, 87th percentile in separation percentage, 92nd percentile in yards per route run. I do think that generally speaking, like you would look at this and you'd be pretty darn happy with his analytic profile. And I think a lot of these stats, like especially the separation percentage, we can definitely look at that and point to that athleticism. The 70th percentile in yards after the catch per reception. What you don't love to see, the contested catch percentage, which I think definitely we can peg right back onto his lack of play strength. 27th percentile in his final season. Also had a 24th percentile drop rate that was 9.9% of drops per catchable target rate. Interesting. He's very interesting. And I do think that the analytics are, I think, really favorable, generally speaking, toward Troy Franklin, but they don't paint the entire picture because when you look at the fact that a lot of that came on go routes and came from a relatively simple route tree, the production is a little bit less impressive when he's not being asked to do quite as many things as some of the other, prospects that are going to rank similarly in terms of those percentile metrics.
Yeah, there's a lot of good here. And if you can throw that graphic back up for me, if you're watching up on YouTube, he gets open a lot, but I think that's a lot of scheme based, right? Because he's playing against off coverage a lot. The yards per route run, which is a pretty sticky stat in terms of telling us which receivers are going to be good. Really good. The yards after catch, good. 70th percentile, right? Like very, very happy with that one. One of the ones that I wanted to mention, drop rate, which is in the 24th percentile. He had a drop on 10% of his catchable targets last year. That's just way too high. 9 total drops. If you're going to drop passes and you're not going to be a contested catch guy, it's really hard. Now you're going to be into a role where it's going to be you're going to be very volatile from week to week. And we saw how frustrating that is with some of the receivers with like a Will Fuller in years past or a Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I just don't know what to think about him because I do think he tracks the ball really well. I do think he has natural hands, but man, there's just some concentration drops. And there's ones where it's just so frustrating where it's like, there's no reason for you to be dropping this pass. Maybe that's something that he can clean up in the NFL. But it is a little bit of a concern for me.
Yeah, and maybe I also think that also, speaks to some of the play strength issues that we've mentioned. Maybe the concentration drops because you're right. Like he does seem to have a intuitive sense of ball tracking, and what you see in terms of a skill set doesn't necessarily always translate to the stats. But I
I
think
know.
generally speaking, like, you're going to look at Troy Franklin, you're going to see the stats, you're going to see the height, you're going to see a lot of things to like. It's just the question of how does he develop at the next level? And if he doesn't develop in terms of all of these things that we're saying that he needs to work on, he's not going to hold much value at all.
I do want to give him some credit with the dominator, 30.7% dominator rating. That's in the 56th percentile. Breakout age, 19.6 in the 74th percentile. So these are all good. Like, he does check a lot of boxes, and this is why he should be a top 75 selection. But I'm also not super excited about him from a dynasty perspective. And we're going to talk about his value in a little bit. But to me, his role in the NFL is as a outside complementary deep threat receiver and not somebody who you funnel a lot of targets to. And I just don't know how valuable that will be at the next level.
I think that's all very fair.
Because we've seen several of these receivers come into the NFL over the last couple of years. I think Jalen Hyatt was a very, very similar prospect last year. Now, the production wasn't there. You can tie that to the quarterback or whatever. But I think he is very much going to be dependent on his landing spot and his fit, because I wouldn't be surprised if he's drafted, let's say, in the 50s, and he's somebody's number 3 receiver, and we just don't see a lot of him early on because he needs time to get up to speed in terms of the NFL route tree. He needs to learn how to beat press coverage. He's not really somebody who's position, flexible. I don't see him being a slot receiver in the next level. For that reason, I think he's a little bit overrated in fantasy and dynasty leagues right now.
I do think that the repeated mention of Jalen Hyatt is a very interesting one, because he came out year one and didn't do a whole lot, right? Again, we can kind of point that to the offense, but I do want to point to Jalen Hyatt's usage in year one, which I would not be surprised if we see a similar type of usage here for Troy Franklin at the next level. Jalen Hyatt saw 45% of his targets on pass attempts of 20 or more yards. That led all wide receivers with at least 15 deep targets. That percentage of deep targets. I mean, you want to talk about a one-trick pony? That is how they used him. It was either down the field or not at all. And that's not what I want. Like, the other 2 receivers in the league that ranked 36% or higher in terms of target rate down the field, Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Justin Watson. Other guys in the top 5, Gabe Davis, Jamison Williams. You're going to notice a pattern here, Marcus, in that none of these players that have that primary deep threat role are consistent fantasy producers. Doesn't mean they don't have high upside on a weekly basis, but generally speaking, it means you're going to have a hard time figuring out when to start these assets on a weekly basis.
And the truth is, you're probably just not, right? He's probably going to be somebody that's on your bench and you just never feel good about starting him. And then the one week that he pops off, he's going to be on your bench, and then you're going to start him the following week and he's going to give you a goose egg. Like, these kind of players are incredibly frustrating unless they can turn into a target hog or somebody who is a more defined route runner. Like, I think the perfect example, like if you want like a super high end comp, and we're going to get to comps in a second, I did not like Terry McLaurin coming out of Ohio State. I thought he was a very linear receiver who did not really produce at all. Comes into the NFL and becomes a much better route runner than I ever anticipated, and has been a pretty good fantasy asset. Like, so it can happen. It just doesn't happen very often.
Very fair.
All right, let's get to some comps, because I've got a good story on a comp for Troy Franklin. I also want to talk about his dynasty value, because boy, oh boy, is he being overdrafted right now. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar that you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar that you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of your first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are discussing Troy Franklin and his dynasty value. And Kate, I got to tell you a quick story about Troy Franklin. So I'm watching his tape last night. I'm going through every one of his targets. And friend of the show, Josh Norris, tweets out, who do you compare Troy Franklin to? And the replies are hilarious and also concerning. So I'm going to read you just a bunch of replies, right? From Dane Brugler, he's DJ Chark. Someone else said he's Jamison Williams, Paul Richardson, Tyquan Thornton, DeMarcus Robinson, Jamison Williams, Darius Slayton, Todd Pinkston, Tyrell Williams, Quez Walker, Darnell Mooney, and Marquez Valdez-Scantling, if he was good at football, Robbie Anderson. And I'm reading all these. I'm like, okay, I can see it. Alex Pierce. And it's like, none of these guys I want on my fantasy team. Now, I know a lot of that depends on the situation and the quarterback, but my fear is we see this type of receiver come into the NFL a lot, and generally they just aren't that important for us in dynasty leagues.
I'm actually happy that you shared that because I think all of those players, they do share one thing in common. Players that, generally speaking, I don't want to have on my dynasty team. Players that, if I do have them on my dynasty team, they will post those really exciting weeks and then flop in the weeks to follow. But you mentioned Jamison Williams, and that was my comp coming out. And I definitely think in terms of like a build, they have very similar frames, both tall guys, but very slight frames that I think hinder their play strength a little bit. I think that sort of vertical threat is one that is, it plays to their strengths, but also not necessarily one that's conducive to fantasy production or a consistent viable role within an offense. But again, all of these guys that we just mentioned here, Jalen Hyatt, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Jamison Williams, Alec Pierce, all of these guys rank in terms of top 10 in terms of target share on 20 plus air yard pass attempts. And again, for as much upside, like we love, air yard potential, we love that, but I need a little bit more of a safe floor when I'm looking at some of these prospects, because I don't see Troy Franklin's skill set as it stands today evolving into one that's going to complement like a full PPR format. If you are in a standard league, let's say without any sort of like half PPR or full PPR scoring, Troy Franklin might be a guy that I'd be a little bit more interested in rostering. That being said, I'm not sure I see it, but let's look at his value right now in terms of dynasty rookie wide receivers. Because right now on consensus rankings via Fantasy Pros, he is coming in at wide receiver 5, which I think is
asinine. It's crazy. It doesn't make any sense.
Marcus, how do I get to that evaluation of Troy Franklin at 5? Because he's coming in much closer to wide receiver 8 or 9 for me than he is coming in at wide receiver 5.
I don't get it. We did a show on Xavier Worthy earlier this week. Xavier Worthy is just a much better prospect who was legitimately
A better
2/10 of a
football
second
player.
a better football player who is 2/10 of a second faster. Like, if I'm gonna gamble on the speed receiver, give me the fastest wide receiver in NFL history, right? I I see Troy Franklin as a lot very similar to Jalen Hyatt, and that's just not a player that I can get behind drafting as a top 5 dynasty receiver. I would much rather gamble on somebody who has the height, weight, speed that maybe projects as a potential X receiver like an AD Mitchell, who we also cover. I've got some concerns about AD Mitchell. I just think that's a much better bet. We're going to talk about Keon Coleman next week. I'm not a huge fan of Keon Coleman, but I would still rather gamble on the upside of Keon Coleman. I've got a feeling once we get to the NFL draft and once we actually start to make some of these boards, you're going to see Troy Franklin fall down the consensus rankings quite a bit. I'll bet that he ends up closer being to wide receiver 10 than he is to wide receiver 5.
Yeah, I hate covering players that I'm not necessarily as crazy about, but like to put some context into the value of Troy Franklin, he is not going to be a cornerstone of your dynasty roster,
No.
presumably. Um, Probably going to be one of these guys that when you need upside in the flex, he might be a viable option on any given week, depending on landing spot. But again, not necessarily a guy that I think any NFL team is going to want as their wide receiver one, just because at this point needs to put on a little bit more weight, needs to, I think evolve a bit in terms of his overall role within an offense beyond running in a straight line, as good as he is when he does that. Um, there's a lot of interesting aspects about this player evaluation, but generally speaking, unless he falls pretty far to me in rookie drafts, I'm probably out.
So the last thing I wanted to ask you, is there a situation or a team where he could land that would get you excited? Because I know there was some first round buzz earlier this offseason. I don't see that. I think he's a second round pick all day long. Is there a spot that you could see where you'd be like, okay, now I'm kind of in?
I think one landing spot that might have me a little bit intrigued would maybe be the Baltimore Ravens. And I don't know
Hmm.
how realistic that is, but
I think it's realistic.
they have Zay Flowers. They lost OBJ this season. I think Troy Franklin is the kind of guy that like they're not going to build their offense around Troy Franklin. They already have a lot of other pieces and in a really talented supporting cast that I think Troy Franklin could come in day one, play the role of the deep threat receiver. We know that Lamar Jackson is more than capable as a passer. You have Derrick Henry on the ground. You have Lamar Jackson on the ground. Like that's a situation where I can picture Troy Franklin just kind of running free and them being able to capitalize on that situation a lot. But again, like the best situation for him, like even if I'm saying that's a good fit for him in the NFL, I still don't necessarily know that it's a great fit in terms of dynasty value.
Can I just give you one really quickly like
Yeah.
that? I'm not saying that I would be all in, but I at least would be intrigued. Like,
How about Bengals? The Bengals?
Bengals are an interesting one because Burrow is a really good deep ball thrower.
They need
What
some
if
speed. Yeah.
they need some speed? What if like the Chargers go offensive line in round 1 and they just bring Franklin in and they know that he's not going to be Keenan Allen or Mike Williams, but you are putting him on an offense that's pretty shallow in terms of wide receiver talent, and you're putting him with a quarterback that can throw the ball down the field. I think I would at least my interest would be peaked there.
Maybe. Honestly, I could see him being an exact repeat of the Quentin Johnston
Awesome.
debacle. I think his play style is almost too reminiscent of Quentin Johnston, where they both have some size, some athleticism, not as much play strength as you might think, given the fact that they have some taller builds.
Sure.
Um, Not as consistent hands as you would like. So I don't know that I necessarily love the fit, but I do know that they're going to need some wide receivers. So
Yeah.
honestly, like bodies
We'll
with a
see.
heartbeat at this point, like Yeah,
with a pulse.
I'm kind of struggling though, because I do think there are a lot of teams that could utilize his skill set, but trying to figure out a complementary role that like will actually suit his fantasy value is kind of a challenge. I think just because of the way, and maybe this is me, with the way that I'm typecasting him, but I guess we can consider, maybe the Tennessee Titans, Will Levis, big arm.
Sure.
There's a lot of I'm trying. I'm really trying. And again, I do not want to be poo-pooing Troy Franklin too hard
That's all
because
right.
I think
I'm poo-pooing it. It's fine. It's
okay.
he's just I stand by my statement. He's the most overrated dynasty rookie receiver right now, and I feel very confident that you're going to see his consensus rank fall over the next month. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen of the day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Modjuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. We will be back on Monday to talk about Florida State wide receiver Keon Coleman and his dynasty value. We will see you then. Have a great weekend, everybody.